Now, I'm sure all of you have seen tapestries and that you know it's a picture woven into cloth by an artist that's called a weaver. It's a decorative rug that can be very large and hung on a wall so that you're better able to see the detailed images on it. They tell a story with their pictures, and that's why they're so big. Well, the story of Ruth that we heard part of last week and the rest of today weaves a tapestry that tells a story of love, faith, respect, trust, and redemption. So let's take a look at this tapestry of a story in the book of Ruth. We're first introduced to Elimelech and Naomi and learn that due to a famine in Israel, they have to move to Moab with their sons. Their sons meet and marry local women, Orpah and Ruth. At some point, all three of these women find themselves widowed, with only each other to rely on. That's all the backstory we have, so it leaves us without any details about what their relationship as a family unit was like before they found themselves without any men to care and provide for them. But even in these first few sentences of the story, there are clues about what their relationship was like before the deaths of their husbands. I think we can assume this family was a close one, that the Moabite women had been introduced to God by the family they married into, and learned about the ways of God's people by being a part of this family. They had come to love and respect one another because of the way they were treated and they treated each other. And I believe it's safe to assume this because in chapter 1, verse 6, we hear these words. When Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, she and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home. The fact that Orpah and Ruth were willing to leave their own home and families to go with their mother-in-law to a land and people they knew nothing about except through the family they married into tells me they were treated well and with love, and the God they learned about was one they could trust. Trust enough to be willing to leave behind the only home they ever knew to go live in the land where his people dwelled. How relieved Naomi must have felt to be able to have these two women with her. But at some point in the journey, she tells them, "Go back, each of you, to your own mother's home. May the Lord show kindness as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me." Naomi even asked that the Lord grant that each of them would find rest in the home of another husband. They wept and they told her they would go with her to her people, but Naomi insisted, reminding them she couldn't offer the protection or provisions she had because she had no more sons who could offer that security. At this point, Naomi starts to feel a little sorry for herself. Chapter 1, verse 13 helps us see the little pity party she's starting to host for herself. She says, "It is more bitter for me than you, because the Lord's hand has turned against me." Naomi was at a low point. She knew that even returning home, her life would be difficult without a man. Now, it's hard for us to imagine that desperation she must have felt today, but in that time, a woman on her own was vulnerable to all kinds of peril. It's at this point in the story that Orpah decides to go back to her own mother and people, but Ruth actually doubles down on her decision to stick it out with Naomi. Her words should have brought such hope and peace to Naomi. She told her, "Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me." Can you imagine someone offering you this kind of unabashed love and devotion? And while I'm not sure if Ruth fully understands the God she's speaking about, I feel certain she will know him intimately before her time on earth was finished. Now, you would think these words of love and devotion would end the pity party Naomi was having, but it didn't. When the two women got to Bethlehem, people said, "Hey, is that Naomi?" And she responded, "Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter." Now, before we start to come down too hard on Naomi, let's think about our own reactions and attitudes when we find ourselves in a hard place. We can be just as stubborn and refuse to find the blessing God gives us in the midst of them. We can get caught up in the hard places to forget, and we forget to look up and ask God to show us where He is in it, because He is there. We just need to call out and ask Him to remind us of all that we have that is good, not just the yuck, and to be our comfort and strength until we can get through it. Well, the story continues, and Naomi sends Ruth into the fields to glean behind the harvesters. Ruth would go behind the workers harvesting, and she'd pick up the leftovers. This was the practice of the time. The workers were actually instructed to leave what fell on the ground for those in need, like our widows, Naomi and Ruth. The owner of the field was Boaz, a relative of Naomi, and he comes to check on things to see how they're going, and he sees Ruth in the field. Ruth must have caught his eye because he asked his overseer who she belonged to, and he's told she's the Moabite that came with Naomi. Boaz then has a conversation with Ruth and tells her, "Don't go to any other field. Stay here, because I can make sure you're safe." And then he even tells the workers, "Be sure to leave extra behind for her." This tells us so much about the character of Ruth and Boaz. Ruth was willing to work hard to take care of her and Naomi, and Boaz was protective and generous. When Naomi asks why she's finding such favor with Boaz and points out that as a foreigner she certainly isn't entitled to it, Boaz tells her he's heard of her good heart, that she was leaving home, she left home to come with Naomi to a foreign place with strangers. You see, Boaz saw the heart of Ruth, and he treated her accordingly. What a wonderful reminder of how God cares more about our heart, and He's waiting to care and love for us. The condition of our heart is what matters most to Him, and He wants us to have a heart for Him. Well, when Naomi comes home with more food than they need and tells her about when Naomi comes home with more food than they need and tells I messed that completely up. When Ruth comes home with more food than they need and tells about her encounter with Boaz, Naomi is thrilled. Boaz is a relative and a guardian redeemer. Now that sounds like a strange title, but all that means is a guardian was a close relative who was responsible for protecting members of the extended family in need. Tucked in this story is this custom of having someone who's willing to stand up and say, "This person is mine, and I'll be responsible for them." What an incredible foreshadowing of Jesus coming to be our Redeemer. The interest Boaz took in Ruth and the way he provided a safe place for her to glean must have set the wheels in Naomi's mind in action. Naomi advises Ruth, go to the threshing floor on the night they'd be winnowing the barley. Naomi knew this would be a night of celebration and everybody would be in a good mood. She tells her to go lie down next to Boaz and uncover his feet. Now, this odd direction was basically instructing Ruth propose marriage to him. I believe Boaz was an upstanding guy, and he wanted to do the right thing. He told Ruth to go home before anyone saw her and her reputation was ruined, and he told her, "I'll take care of everything." And he did. He knew there was one relative ahead of him in line as kinsman redeemer who had the right to buy the property that belonged to Elimelech and get Ruth as a wife to boot. So he went to the city gate where business was conducted with lots of witnesses, and he made the deal for the land and got Ruth's hand in marriage so that Naomi and Ruth would have a home where they would be cared for and safe. That's the big picture of the story found in Ruth. It's the one you would see if it were woven on a tapestry and you were standing far back in a big room looking at it. It shows the major events of the story. But let's take a step closer in and see the intricate details, because it's in the small moments that we find God in the story. In this story and in our story, God is working and waiting and weaving together all the different tangled up pieces to make His masterpiece. God works big things out in small ways, in ways that don't seem to make sense. So Ruth was a Moabite that never would have been introduced to God were it not for a famine in Israel that drove Elimelech and his family to her hometown. The fact that she was a Moabite points to God's plan for offering salvation for all of us when He sent Jesus to be our Redeemer. Not for a few, but for all who hear and believe. Had Ruth, Naomi, and Orpah not become widows, they wouldn't have needed to leave their home to return to Bethlehem. Now, this seems like an awful circumstance, the death of 3 men in this family to further their story. But it's important to remember that while God doesn't cause these horrible situations or the hard things that even we face, He was there in the middle of them, and He's there in the middle of our hard things, ready to comfort and help and make good things from bad. Another detail of this story that could have changed the whole landscape of the whole picture dramatically was the decision Ruth made to go with her mother-in-law. When she made that decision, she bound her life and future with Naomi, but that also meant she was bound to God, the one true God. I can't help but feel a little sad for Orpah. I'm sure she thought she was making the better choice, but in not taking the risk and continuing with Naomi and Ruth, she missed out on discovering God and what life with Him may offer. But in making the choice to follow Naomi and become a part of her people, Ruth actually stepped out in faith and trust. That faith may not have been fully realized, but aren't we glad God only asks us to have the faith of a mustard seed? With the smallest amount of faith, God can and does move mountains. Ruth may not have understood what she was linking herself to when she said, "Your God will be my God," but the simple act of obedience and love is all God needs to start to do amazing things in and through us. Well, once they found themselves in their new home, God had them right where they were meant to be to turn that bad season into one of blessings and favor. But it didn't happen without more faith and obedience. Sometimes taking that first step out in faith and saying yes to God gives us the confidence we need to continue. I think that's what happened with Ruth. Once she said yes to leaving behind her past for a new future, there was no turning back. She was all in. That might explain why she was brave enough, bold enough to follow Naomi's instructions with Boaz and ask him to marry her. For that time, that would have been considered very brazen. She may have been a Moabite and a foreigner, but Boaz's treatment of her must have had the effect of making her feel like this could really be her home and these could really be her people. I want you to think of each person in this story as a single thread in the tapestry that tells the whole thing. The decisions they made individually are woven together by God to show a bigger picture, a bigger story, and that's the story of God. The way God wove the threads of their life together added them to the genealogy of Jesus. Matthew 1, verses 5 and 6 record, Salmon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab, another seemingly loose thread that God chose for his tapestry. Boaz, the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Obed, the father of Jesse, and Jesse, the father of King David. You know how the rest of that goes. Amazing. Each thread alone can't do much to create the image, but when a master weaver comes along, he can pick up each one of those threads and expertly weave them together in a way that makes the picture complete. God sees how they could come together in a perfect way, just like He can see how to weave our lives with each other. When we look at the upper side of a tapestry, the picture is clear and smooth with order and beauty. But if you turn it over and look at the underside, you see a jumbled mess of knots that don't seem to go together at all. It's hard to find a beginning or an end, much less make sense of how it works together to create what you see on the other side. That image is a good one to remember when we find ourselves in a jumbled mess, when all we see are knots and problems, without understanding how this will all smooth out and create something worthwhile. We want to see and know the whole picture, to see how it's going to work itself out, or we want to cut away all the threads of others that get in the way because it's just too complicated. But by knowing the outcome or taking a shortcut and not getting involved with others, we rely less on God and more on ourselves. We miss out on the way our lives get connected with others along the way to make the story stronger and more interesting and beautiful. God wants us to trust Him, to be obedient, not because we know how it's going to work out, but because we trust Him to work it out for us. He wants us to work together to be a community who laughs and cries and sometimes even disagrees, because these are the things that make the tapestry intriguing and powerful. When we're joined together in shared experiences and invite others to come with us, we're inviting them to add their thread of life to ours in Christ. And then the picture becomes something new and exciting. Our lives, the way we live and love, are invitations to others to experience what it looks like to love and follow Jesus. There's only one who can be all things to all people at all time, and he indeed is the master weaver that sees how each small decision on our part can be used to create big impact on those who know us but don't yet know him. God is more than capable of taking what we have to offer, our sincere hearts, and weaving it with others to continue the story of his love and mercy. To close, I found a poem, and it's in your sermon notes. It's called The Weaving. My life is but a weaving between my God and me. I cannot choose the colors. He weaveth steadily. Oft times he weaveth sorrow, and I in foolish pride forget he sees the upper, and I the underside. Not till the loom is silent and the shuttle cease to fly will God unroll the canvas and reveal the reason why. The dark threads are as needful in the weaver's skillful hand as the threads of gold and silver in the pattern he has planned. He knows, he loves, he cares. Nothing this truth can dim. He gives the very best to those who leave the choice to him.